There are moments in life when you realize the people you trusted the most are the ones who would betray you. It's a feeling that comes too late, when it's almost impossible to go back and undo the damage. But what if, against all odds, you could take back control? What if you could fight back, not with strength, but with something deeper, something no one saw coming? Let's begin this journey together. Stay tuned, and don't forget to comment where you're watching from. I remember the day George died as if it were yesterday. The world shifted beneath me, and I didn't know how to hold on anymore. At 84, I thought I had lived enough for one lifetime. But nothing prepares you for the loss of someone who's been by your side for so long. 3 years ago, he was taken from me, and since then, my world has been a dull echo of what it once was. I've been living with Ethan ever since, my only son. I always thought I'd grow old in the house George and I built together, surrounded by memories. But that was before Alzheimer's began its slow, insidious march through my mind. It started small, just a forgotten name or a misplaced key, but over time, it became harder to hide. I knew it was coming, and so did Ethan. At first, he was so kind. He helped me with things around the house, bringing me tea in the mornings, walking with me when my legs grew weak. I thought things might be okay, that we'd find a way through this new chapter together. But as the disease tightened its grip, something shifted in Ethan. His patience started to fray. The kind smiles turned into exasperated sighs. "Mom, you can't even remember where you put your glasses." His voice would snap, and I'd feel a wave of shame. It wasn't his fault. He didn't sign up for this. But it didn't make the hurt any less. He became increasingly distant, irritable, as if my very presence was a burden he was forced to bear. I could see it in his eyes, the resentment growing stronger each day. He didn't need to say it. I could feel it in the way he looked at me. I wasn't the woman I used to be. I wasn't his mother anymore. I was a problem. And slowly, I started to realize that maybe, just maybe, I was becoming a problem for him too. One afternoon, he took me to the doctor. I hadn't been to see him in months, too afraid of what he might say. But Ethan insisted. He sat next to me in the waiting room, his hand resting on my arm, but his eyes distant, as if he couldn't quite look at me. The doctor's words were a blur. I didn't understand much of it, only the weight of the diagnosis. Alzheimer's. Ethan had that look in his eyes, the one that spoke volumes. I didn't have to ask him what it meant, but I already knew. The look wasn't of concern. It was a look of finality, the kind of look you give a lost cause. After the appointment, he drove me home in silence. The tension between us was palpable. I tried to fill the void with small talk, but he barely responded. When we got back to the house, he told me there were things we needed to take care of. Legal things, he said. "We need to make sure everything is in order before you forget it all," Ethan said, his voice unusually calm. "For your own good, Mom." I wasn't sure what he meant, but I nodded, feeling small under the weight of his words. I didn't want to make him angry. Didn't want to make him feel like I was any more of a burden than I already was. The next day, he sat me down with a stack of papers. There were so many of them, so many words I couldn't make sense of. Ethan told me I needed to sign. He said it was just paperwork, just to make sure that everything was handled. I wasn't sure what I was signing, but Ethan reassured me. "Don't worry, Mom. This is for you. I'm doing this for you." His voice was so smooth, so reassuring, but I could see it in his eyes, the way he glanced at me, calculating. There was something more in his tone, something I couldn't quite place, something cold. I hesitated. My mind was foggy, slipping between memories and confusion, but I had to do what was right. I had to trust him. I had to believe that he was doing what was best for me. So I signed. The weight of the pen in my hand felt heavier than I expected, but I didn't question it. Not then. I just signed, feeling a strange emptiness spread through me. Something told me I was making a mistake, but I couldn't grasp why. I didn't know how to stop. When I finished, Ethan smiled that same smile, the one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good," he said. "I'm glad you're on board, Mom." And just like that, I felt the last thread of trust between us snap. The moment I signed those papers, something inside me shifted, but it was too late. Ethan had already taken control, and I was left with nothing but the echoes of my own confusion. I don't know when it happened. When the warmth in Ethan's eyes, the kindness in his voice, faded into something colder, sharper. But I felt it. I saw it, and I couldn't stop it. The man I had trusted, the son I had raised with love, was becoming a stranger to me. After I signed those papers that felt like a quiet surrender, Ethan's transformation became brutally apparent. At first, it was small things, a comment here or there, but soon, the cracks began to show. He would catch me forgetting something, my keys, a name, a date, and he'd laugh, but not in a way that made me feel like it was okay. No, it was a laugh filled with mockery. Really, Mom? Can't even remember that? You're useless, he'd say, the words cutting deeper than I expected. Each time, I felt smaller, less than the woman I once was, less than his mother. And then, there were the days when he would outright humiliate me, in front of strangers, in front of family, in front of Rebecca. I don't know why you even bother trying, he said one day, his voice icy, as I struggled to remember where I'd put the laundry basket. You're incapable of doing anything right. You can't even care for yourself anymore. I didn't know how to respond. I just stood there, shaking, my mind scattered with fragments of thoughts. I was trying. I really was. I was doing my best to stay active, to help, but it was like every little effort was met with scorn. And Ethan wasn't alone in this. Rebecca, my daughter, who had always been my little light, never stood up for me. She visited, but she barely acknowledged what was happening. She'd nod, tell me I needed to accept things, and then walk away, leaving me with the heavy silence of what was really happening. I could see it in her eyes too, the same indifference I saw in Ethan's, the same quiet acceptance of the way he treated me. I couldn't understand it. I used to be everything to her. Now I was just someone she tolerated. It felt like I was invisible. One morning, after I had spent the better part of an hour trying to remember how to work the dishwasher, Ethan came into the kitchen and found me in the middle of my struggle, his face twisted with frustration. "You're a mess," he snapped. "I don't know why I even let you try." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't asking for his help. I wasn't asking to be treated like this. I just wanted to feel like I mattered. But I didn't. Not anymore. A few days later, things got worse. Ethan told me that he was moving me. He didn't ask, didn't explain, just told me it was for my own good. He led me to a small room in the back of the house, what used to be a guest room, a place that was once filled with laughter and visitors. Now it was cold, bare. The walls felt like they were closing in around me. The furniture was old, the sheets worn thin. It was like he was making a point. He was making sure I knew I no longer mattered. I wasn't welcome in the heart of the house anymore. I remember standing in that room, staring at the thin curtains and the empty space. It didn't feel like home. It didn't feel like anything. It felt like a cage. "You'll be fine here," Ethan said, his voice distant, as if he were speaking to a stranger. I wanted to say something, to tell him that this wasn't right, that I deserved more than this, but my mouth felt dry, my thoughts too scattered. I couldn't even remember the words to explain how much this hurt. As days passed, Ethan took over everything, the house, the decisions, my life. Every time I tried to help, to do something, anything, he found a way to make me feel worthless. He'd sigh heavily, roll his eyes, and tell me I was out of touch with reality. "You're crazy, Mom. You can't even keep up with the simplest things. You're useless," he'd mutter, loud enough for everyone to hear. It stung, but it also made me wonder, was this happening because of my Alzheimer's? Or was it always like this? Was I just seeing Ethan for who he really was now, someone who resented me? I couldn't tell anymore. My mind was slipping, and with it, I couldn't separate my fears from reality. But something deep down told me that Ethan wasn't just a frustrated son. No, there was something darker here, and the disease. It wasn't just my mind that was deteriorating. It was my relationship with him. It was everything. I tried not to cry, tried not to let it show that I was losing everything. My memory, my dignity, my family. But I couldn't help it. Every day I felt more lost, more like a ghost. I was living in the shadows of my own life, ignored by the people who should have been my greatest allies. Rebecca came by that weekend. She smiled and gave me a hug, but it felt forced. There was no concern in her eyes, no empathy, just distance. "How are you holding up, Mom?" she asked casually, as if this was all just a normal phase. I tried to answer, but the words caught in my throat. I didn't know how to explain the suffocating feeling that had taken over my life, that no matter how hard I tried, Ethan was slipping away from me, and so was Rebecca. "I'm fine," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. But I wasn't fine. I wasn't fine at all. I wasn't fine. I spent the rest of the day in my small, isolated room, alone with my thoughts, alone with the sharp edges of my memories, the fading pieces of a life I used to recognize. The woman I had been, the mother I had been, felt like she was slipping further and further away. But in that quiet, in that emptiness, something stirred, a quiet spark of defiance. I wasn't sure how or when, but I knew I wasn't going to let this be my ending. Not like this. Not after everything George and I had built. Not after everything I had given. But what could I do? The day Ethan told me I was going to a nursing home was like any other. But this time, there was no pretense, no softness in his voice. It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't a discussion. It was a decision. He told me it was for my own good, that I'd be better off somewhere I could get proper care, that I wouldn't be such a burden. He didn't ask how I felt about it. He didn't care. He just told me to pack a bag, and that's what I did. I could feel the numbness taking over, my mind swirling in confusion as I tried to process what was happening. It was all happening too fast. The house I once called home was slipping away, piece by piece. The man who was supposed to care for me, my son, was making decisions without even looking back. He drove me there in silence, a long, cold drive where I stared out of the window, watching the world pass by like a blur. I could feel a strange sense of dread building in my chest, but I didn't have the strength to fight it. When we arrived, Ethan didn't even walk me inside. He parked the car, grabbed my suitcase, and handed it to a nurse at the front door without a word. I wanted to say something, to tell him to stop, to ask him to reconsider, but the words caught in my throat. I didn't even know what to say. And then, just like that, he was gone. I watched him walk away, never turning back, never offering a second glance. I was alone. The nursing home was nothing like the life I had known. It was stark, cold, and smelled of antiseptic. The walls were white, too white. The lighting was harsh, like a hospital, but there was nothing comforting about it. The nurses barely looked at me as they led me to a tiny room, one that was too small for a woman who had once lived in a home filled with laughter and warmth. The bed was too hard. The chair in the corner was stiff and uncomfortable. There was no personal touch, no sense of belonging. Everything about this place screamed institutional, and I was just another face in the crowd, another patient, another number. I didn't belong here, but Ethan didn't care. I spent the first few days staring out the small window, watching the world move on without me. I tried to understand why I was here. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but my voice felt small, insignificant, lost in the silence of the nursing home. The days stretched into weeks, and Ethan's visits never came. He promised he would come by. He said he'd check in on me. But he didn't. I was forgotten. I began to feel like I didn't even exist anymore. My life had been reduced to a shadow of what it once was. And then, one afternoon, as I sat in my small room, staring at the drab walls, I met Charlie. Charlie was an older man, his skin weathered and lined with age. He had the look of someone who had seen too much of life's harshness, someone who had lived a life that wasn't easy. I knew he wasn't like the others in the home. He had a rough edge to him, a world-weary demeanor, but there was something kind about his eyes. We struck up a conversation one day in the common room, and I found that I couldn't stop talking. He listened to me, really listened, in a way that I hadn't felt in years. I told him about George, about our life together, about the house we had built, the life we had made, and he listened without interruption, without pity. He didn't look at me like I was fragile or lost. He just listened. Charlie had been through his own struggles. He was an ex-convict. Having spent years in prison for a crime he said he regretted. But there was no bitterness in his voice when he spoke about it. He had a sharp, cynical view of the world, but it wasn't without reason. Life had taught him hard lessons. Still, there was something about him, something that made me feel not so alone. He shared stories of his life, of things he had seen, things he had learned. But the more we talked, the more I realized he was teaching me something. One day, as we sat in the small garden behind the nursing home, Charlie looked at me, his face serious for the first time. "You know, Mabel," he said, his voice low, "you still have control. It might not feel like it right now, but you do. This place, these people, they don't own you. You're not just a number here. If you want to take back what's yours, you can, but you have to want it." His words hit me harder than anything Ethan had said. I hadn't even considered that I could fight back, that I could still have a say in what happened to me. But Charlie believed it, and for the first time in a long time, I found myself believing it, too. I looked at him, my mind swirling with possibilities. What if I could? What if there was a way to regain control of my life, to take back what Ethan had taken from me? Charlie wasn't wrong. I wasn't just a shadow. I wasn't just a forgotten old woman. I was Mabel Pierce, and I still had the power to change my fate. And with that, something inside me shifted. I didn't know what the next step would be, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let Ethan's betrayal be my end. Charlie became more than just a friend. He became my ally, my guide through the fog of confusion and fear. Every day, he would sit with me, patiently listening as I spoke about the hurt and betrayal I felt. He didn't pity me. He didn't talk down to me. He saw the woman I used to be, the woman who still had the strength to fight, even if I didn't know it yet. It was Charlie who opened my eyes to the truth I had been too blind to see, the truth that Ethan had manipulated me, that he had convinced me I was useless, that my life no longer belonged to me. He made me believe I was too far gone, that my decisions didn't matter anymore, that I had no voice left. I had let him take control, and for so long, I thought it was because I was ill, because my mind was failing. But Charlie showed me something different. He showed me that I had been tricked, that I wasn't powerless. "You've got to stop thinking like a victim, Mabel," Charlie told me one afternoon, his voice firm, but not unkind. "This isn't just about what Ethan's done. It's about what you can still do. You're not finished, not by a long shot." He was right. I wasn't finished. I might have forgotten things. I might have lost parts of myself along the way. But I wasn't gone. Not yet. Charlie helped me understand something important that I hadn't even considered before. I still had control over my life, my money, my future. The thought was so simple, yet it hadn't occurred to me. But there was more to it than just regaining control. There were documents. There were legal papers I had signed in my confusion, thinking they were just routine, thinking Ethan was looking out for me. But Charlie had a different perspective. He spoke about testaments, wills, and how they could be altered, changed, and how they were often manipulated by those with ill intentions. "You've got more power than you think," Charlie said, his tone low, like he was sharing a secret. "Testaments can be changed. The right lawyer can make a difference. Don't let Ethan think he's already won." It was the first time in months that I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could take back what I had lost. Maybe I could reclaim my independence, my dignity. But the road ahead wouldn't be easy. I had to be careful. Ethan and David Lane were powerful, and they had manipulated me once. I couldn't let them do it again. In one of our long conversations, as we sat in the small garden behind the nursing home, something inside me started to stir. Memories I hadn't thought about in years began to surface. Memories of George, my dear, sweet George. I remembered his warnings. He had always been suspicious of Ethan, always uncomfortable with how much my son seemed to expect from me. He used to tell me, "Mabel, protect your independence. Don't let him take what's yours. He's got his eye on the wrong things. He's greedy. You have to be careful." I had brushed it off then, thinking George was just being protective, perhaps even paranoid. But now, in the quiet of this new life, those words rang louder than ever. Ethan had never been the man George thought he was. No, he had been worse, much worse. And now, looking back, I could see it all so clearly. Ethan had used my illness against me, convinced me to give him control, and I had done it without a second thought. But it wasn't too late. Charlie made me realize that, despite my illness, I wasn't beyond help. I could still change the course of things. I could still fight for what was mine. "You were never meant to give him everything," Charlie said one day, his voice quiet, but filled with conviction. "You gave him too much, but you can take it back. Mabel, it's not gone yet." The more I thought about it, the more I understood. The house, the money, everything I had once shared with George. It wasn't meant for Ethan to take without question. George had warned me. He had seen Ethan's greed, and now I saw it too. But I wasn't going to let him have it all. Not without a fight. Charlie had given me the strength to begin planning. The path wasn't clear, and I had no idea where it would lead. But I knew one thing. I had to act. I had to find the right lawyer, someone who could help me take control of what I had lost. I had to make sure Ethan didn't get away with this. But I also knew I had to be careful. Ethan was still my son, and he was dangerous. If I was too brash, Too quick, I could lose everything. So I started slowly, gathering information, looking at the documents I had signed. I started to remember things I had forgotten, things George had said. Slowly, the pieces began to fit together. I wasn't just some old woman who had forgotten her past. I was Mabel Pierce. I had a life, a history, a legacy to protect. And with Charlie by my side, I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could take back what was mine. It was time to fight back. With each passing day, clarity returned to me like a long-lost friend. Slowly, my mind began to regain its focus, the fog of Alzheimer's lifting just enough for me to see the path ahead. It wasn't easy. At times, I still felt lost in the confusion of my own thoughts, but I could no longer deny the fire that burned inside me. I wasn't going to sit back and let Ethan destroy everything George and I had worked for. Charlie had given me the tools to fight back. He helped me understand that I still had options, that there were people who could help me find my way out of this nightmare. It started with a phone call, a new lawyer, someone I could trust. We met in a small, dimly lit office downtown. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Linda, listened as I explained the situation. She was professional, kind, and most importantly, she believed in me. As we went through the documents I had signed with Ethan, the truth began to unravel. Every piece of paper, every signature, was a step toward my own betrayal. Ethan had manipulated me into transferring everything into his name, while I was none the wiser. But now, with Linda's help, I was starting to see the cracks in his plan. Charlie had been invaluable too. He helped me remember things George had said in the years before his death, conversations that had seemed so trivial back then, warnings George had given me about Ethan's greed and his intentions to control everything we had. George had told me to be careful, that I needed to protect my assets. I'd never listened closely enough, always thinking it was just his protective instincts as a husband. But now I realized how right he had been. I spent hours going through the legal documents, the bank statements, the transfer of assets, and bit by bit, I started piecing together the web of manipulation Ethan had spun. He'd convinced me to sign papers I didn't fully understand, papers that gave him control over everything. But now, with the right help, I could see the lies and the fraud. There were discrepancies, signatures that didn't match, dates that didn't make sense. Ethan must have thought I was too far gone to fight back. He didn't realize that, despite the disease, I still had a spark of the woman I once was. A woman who wouldn't stand for being treated like this. As I dug deeper, I found something even more troubling. David Lane, the lawyer who had helped Ethan with all the legalities, wasn't just an innocent bystander. No, he was part of the scheme. He had been helping Ethan cover up everything, falsifying signatures, forging documents, lying about the terms of the will. I hadn't suspected him before, but now, as I looked at the evidence, it was clear. David was as much of a manipulator as Ethan was. Charlie was the one who pointed it out. Ethan isn't the only one you need to worry about. That lawyer of his, David Lane, he's dirty. He's been covering up too much for too long. You need to dig into him. The more I uncovered, the more I realized just how deep the deceit went. David had thought I wouldn't notice. He thought that because I was aging and struggling with my memory, I would just let everything slide. But he was wrong. The day I finally confronted Ethan, was one I will never forget. He walked into my room with that same smug expression he had worn for the past few months, believing that I was completely under his thumb. But he wasn't expecting the woman he had once known to be gone, replaced by someone who had a plan. "You're being cruel, Mom," Ethan said, his voice rising with frustration. "I'm the one who's been taking care of you. You think I'm doing this for me? I'm trying to help you." I let him talk, let him spew his lies, but inside, I was already making my move. I wasn't afraid of him anymore. His threats didn't scare me. "I know exactly what you've been doing, Ethan," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You've manipulated me. You've lied to me, and I'm not going to let it continue." Ethan froze, his face drained of color. For the first time, I saw the panic in his eyes. He hadn't expected me to fight back. He hadn't expected me to wake up from the haze he had created. "I have the documents, Ethan," I continued. "The fraud, the forged signatures. I have everything I need to take this to court. You won't get away with this." His reaction was immediate. Anger flared in his eyes, and his fists clenched. "You're making a huge mistake," he spat. "You're going to regret this." But I wasn't afraid. I wasn't the helpless old woman he thought I was. With Linda's help, I was going to take back what was mine. Charlie had helped me see what needed to be done, and now I was ready to act. I wasn't just taking back the house, the company, the money. I was taking back my dignity. I wasn't going to let Ethan or David control my life any longer. As the days passed, I gathered more evidence, more proof of the deceit. The legal team was on my side, working tirelessly to expose Ethan and David for what they were. I had everything I needed. The testaments, the documents, the forged signatures, all neatly compiled and ready for the confrontation I had been preparing for. The weight of what I had uncovered had been heavy on my shoulders, but now I was ready. I was finally going to take control of my life again. Ethan thought I was weak. He thought I was just a confused old woman who wouldn't remember her own name, let alone the deception he had woven around me. For months, he'd manipulated me, twisted my trust into submission. But now I had proof, and I wasn't afraid anymore. I asked him to come over one afternoon. I kept my tone calm, controlled. Nothing about this was going to be rushed. He walked into my room like he owned the place, his usual air of superiority hanging over him. He still thought he had the upper hand. He still thought I was broken. "Mom, you wanted to see me?" he asked, his voice a little too smooth, as if he didn't want to reveal the growing discomfort I could see in his eyes. "Yes," I said, standing up and meeting his gaze. "I have something to show you." I wasn't going to let him make me feel small. I wasn't going to cower under his gaze anymore. I walked over to the desk and pulled out the new will, the one I had worked with my lawyer to draft. My hands were steady as I slid it across the table toward him. His eyes immediately narrowed, but he said nothing. He was waiting for me to speak. "You think you've won?" "Don't you?" I said, my voice low but firm. "You've been taking everything from me, manipulating me, using my own confusion against me." Ethan stood there, quiet, but I could see his hands trembling slightly. He thought I was still lost. He thought I was still vulnerable. But this time, I wasn't going to back down. I wasn't going to let him hide behind his lies any longer. "I've seen everything, Ethan," I continued, my voice stronger now. "The forged signatures, the lies, the manipulation. You thought I was too sick to remember, too far gone to notice what you were doing. But I remember more than you think." I took a deep breath and slid the New Testament across to him. The one that reversed all of his fraudulent actions. His eyes went wide. His confident demeanor cracked. He picked up the document, his hands shaking slightly as he read the words on the paper. His face paled with each line he read, and it was as if the air was sucked from the room. The man who had once been so sure of himself now stood in front of me, suddenly aware that the ground he thought he stood on was crumbling beneath him. "You can't be serious," Ethan finally muttered, his voice faltering. "You're the one who's not serious, Ethan," I said, my voice cold. "You've been playing me for a fool, and I'm done being your pawn." The silence between us was thick with tension. Ethan's eyes flickered between the New Testament and me, a deep, unsettling realization settling in. He had been caught. There was no way out now. "You're wrong," he snapped, trying to regain some semblance of control. "I'm doing all of this for you. You don't understand. I'm just trying to help you." "Mom, everything I've done is for your own good." But I wasn't buying it. Not anymore. "Stop lying," I said, my voice quiet but cutting. "You didn't do any of this for me. You did it for yourself. You wanted everything. My money, my home, my life. And now, you're not going to get away with it. I know what you did. And I'm taking it all back." Ethan took a step back, as if the words themselves had physically knocked him. His eyes darted around the room, like he was looking for an escape, but he couldn't find one. I didn't mean for it to go this far," he muttered, his voice breaking. "You don't know what it's been like for me. I've been trying to take care of you, trying to help." His words were hollow. His tone, once so confident, was now filled with desperation. He could no longer hide behind his facade of care. Not when I had the truth in my hands. David Lane, the lawyer who had helped him, had no place left to hide either. I knew he was just as guilty as Ethan. I knew that, as soon as Ethan's manipulation began to unravel, David would be next in line for exposure. I had already started the process of gathering evidence against him, making sure his involvement would come to light. When Ethan's face turned to confusion and panic, I saw his mind racing. "You can't do this," he said, voice shaking. "You'll regret it. You don't know what you're doing." I stood my ground. I know exactly what I'm doing, and you're not going to control me anymore. Ethan's world crumbled right before him. The humiliation was unmistakable. He realized, with a sinking heart, that the power he thought he had was slipping away. It wasn't just about money anymore. It wasn't even about the inheritance. It was about control. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity. And no matter how much he begged, no matter how much he tried to intimidate me, there was no turning back. David Lane, realizing his own role in this scheme was about to be exposed, tried to distance himself from Ethan, but it was too late. The evidence was already in motion. The legal wheels were turning. Ethan and David both thought they had me cornered, but they hadn't accounted for my resilience, for the strength I still had inside. "I'm done with you, Ethan," I said, the words final. "You've lost. Now you'll pay for what you've done." As I watched him walk out, his head hung low, I couldn't help but feel a small sense of triumph. The tables had turned. The game was mine to play now. In the days following my confrontation with Ethan, a strange sense of clarity settled over me. I had taken control, not just of the inheritance, but of my life. I had reclaimed something that had been slipping away from me for so long, and the more I stepped into that newfound power, the more it seemed to fuel me. The legal documents were in my favor. The new will was in place, and I had a team of lawyers working tirelessly to expose Ethan and David for their manipulations. But I knew this was just the beginning. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. Charlie was still by my side, helping me navigate the legal maze that had once felt insurmountable. He was more than a friend now. He was my ally, my mentor in this fight for justice. Together, we sifted through the evidence, connecting the dots of Ethan and David's fraudulent schemes. With each passing day, the web of lies they had spun unraveled more, exposing the depths of their greed. The investigation was slow, methodical, and it would take time to gather everything we needed. But now, with new legal counsel and unwavering determination, I felt like I had the upper hand. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid to face Ethan. He thought he had me cornered. He thought I was a victim, someone who could be manipulated and ignored. But now, I was the one pulling the strings. Ethan, of course, wasn't going down without a fight. Humiliated by our last confrontation, he retreated into his old tricks, manipulating others, trying to twist the narrative in his favor. He began turning to other members of the family, trying to convince them that I was losing my mind, that I was being cruel and vindictive in my actions. He painted himself as the long-suffering son, the one who had been doing what was best for me while I fought back against the good he was trying to do. But those who had once sided with him were starting to see through his act. Rebecca, my daughter, was the first to waver. She had always been hesitant, always unsure of where her loyalty should lie. But after hearing the truth, after seeing the evidence of Ethan's deceit, she began to distance herself from him. I could see the guilt in her eyes when we spoke, the way she apologized for not having seen it sooner. "I didn't know, Mom," she said one afternoon, her voice heavy with regret. "I should have known. I'm sorry. I should have stood by you." I could see the weight she was carrying, and I understood it. It wasn't easy to confront the truth, especially when it meant going against your own flesh and blood. But seeing her finally acknowledge the wrongs Ethan had done to me was a small victory in itself. It wasn't just about the inheritance. It was about family, trust, and the realization that betrayal had been hiding right in front of us all along. As the truth began to spread, the family started to see Ethan for what he truly was. The carefully constructed image of the dutiful son started to crack, and the whispers began. They began to question his motives, his actions, and his words. The more they learned, the more Ethan's betrayal became undeniable. And as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, I could finally stand tall. I was no longer the forgotten mother in the back of the house. I was no longer the victim of Ethan's manipulations. I was Mabel Pierce, a woman who had fought for her rights, who had found the strength to stand up for herself when the world seemed determined to knock her down. And I wasn't going to let Ethan or anyone else take that away from me. With the help of my lawyer, I began to restore my position legally. I wasn't just regaining control over my assets. I was reasserting my dignity, my independence, and my place in this world. Ethan had thought that by isolating me, by manipulating me, he could silence me. But I wasn't silenced anymore. I had found my voice, and it was stronger than ever. Ethan, now realizing that the walls were closing in on him, became desperate. He tried to manipulate Rebecca, tried to convince her that I was losing touch with reality, but his words fell on deaf ears. The family was no longer in his corner, and as they saw through his lies, they began to rally around me. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of unity, not just within myself, but within the family. It wasn't perfect. There were still wounds to heal, relationships to rebuild, but it was a start, and that was more than I had hoped for. Ethan, on the other hand, was losing everything. His control over me, his plans for the inheritance, everything he had worked so hard to manipulate was slipping away. He tried to regain some semblance of power, but it was too late. He had underestimated me. He had thought that by pushing me aside, by treating me like a burden, he could get away with it. But I had proven him wrong. I wasn't just taking back my inheritance, I was taking back my life. And no one, not Ethan, not David Lane, could take that from me. The battle wasn't over, but I was ready for whatever came next. The truth had begun to emerge, and there was no stopping it now. Ethan had lost the power he thought he had, and I was just getting started. The weight of the New Testament in my hands was heavier than I expected. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was my weapon, my declaration that I was taking back control of everything Ethan had stolen from me. But even with that New Testament, I knew I couldn't rest. Ethan wasn't the only one who had been involved in the betrayal. David Lane, the lawyer who had helped him weave his web of lies, was just as guilty, and I wasn't about to let him escape the consequences of his actions. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to David than I had seen. I knew that he had helped Ethan manipulate me, but I couldn't help wondering if there was a history behind him, something more sinister than I had first imagined. It was time to dig deeper. With Charlie's help, I began researching David, looking for any connections, any past mistakes that might give me leverage. What I found shocked me. David Lane wasn't just a corrupt lawyer helping a greedy son. He had a long history of fraudulent behavior. His name appeared in several cases of financial misconduct and legal corruption that had been buried, swept under the rug by clever manipulation and powerful connections. Over the years, he had managed to dodge any serious consequences, covering up his crimes, quietly erasing any traces of his wrongdoings. But nothing stays hidden forever, especially not when someone is determined to uncover the truth. I couldn't believe it at first, but the more I dug, the more I found. He had been involved in multiple fraudulent cases, using his position to manipulate wills, embezzle money, and cheat people out of their inheritances. It wasn't just me that he had taken advantage of. It was countless others, their voices silenced by his carefully crafted lies. I had been just one in a long line of victims, but I wasn't going to be silenced. Not anymore. I wasn't just fighting for my inheritance. I was fighting to make sure David and Ethan couldn't hurt anyone else. With Charlie at my side, I began gathering evidence against David. We approached the right authorities, knowing that this wasn't going to be easy, but that it had to be done. It was the only way to ensure that Ethan and David would face the consequences of their actions. Charlie was invaluable during this time. His experience, his knowledge of people who operated in the shadows, gave me the tools I needed to build a case. We started compiling everything: old court records, testimonies from people who had been wronged by David, financial documents that proved the extent of his manipulations. Each piece of evidence brought us closer to exposing him for who he truly was. But it wasn't just about the legal battle. It was about taking back the power they had stolen from me. I had spent too long feeling helpless, too long letting them control my life. But now, with every piece of evidence I uncovered, I could feel the balance shifting in my favor. Meanwhile, Ethan was growing more desperate by the day. His pride had been shattered by my confrontation, and he could sense that the walls were closing in. He tried to manipulate other members of the family again, spreading lies about me, making up excuses for his actions. But it was clear, the support he once had was slipping away. His desperation made him more reckless, and as the truth began to emerge, he was losing more ground with every passing day. Rebecca, too, was coming around. It wasn't easy for her. She had spent so long torn between loyalty to her brother and the realization of what he had done to me. But now, as the evidence against him mounted, she couldn't deny the truth any longer. Slowly but surely, I could see her start to distance herself from Ethan. The guilt she had carried for so long was starting to lift, and she was beginning to understand that her support needed to lie with the truth, not with the person who had betrayed us both. In many ways, the battle for my inheritance had become a battle for my family. I wasn't just fighting for money or property anymore. I was fighting to restore the bonds that had been broken, to prove to Rebecca that she didn't need to carry the weight of her brother's lies, to show her that, in the end, family isn't about blind loyalty. It's about honesty, trust, and standing up for what's right. David, meanwhile, was starting to feel the pressure. The authorities had begun their investigations, and it was only a matter of time before his past caught up with him. He had thought he could walk away unscathed, but now he could see that there were people who weren't going to let him get away with his crimes. He was isolated, cornered. His connections were no longer enough to protect him. The more I exposed, the more I manipulated the situations to my advantage. Every new piece of evidence was another nail in Ethan and David's coffins. They hadn't expected me to be a threat. They hadn't expected me to rise from the ashes, to fight back when they thought I had nothing left. But I had learned from George's warnings, and from everything I had been through, that the real power lies in not giving up, even when the world wants to push you down. I wasn't going to stop, not until both Ethan and David paid for their betrayal. The final pieces were falling into place. The truth was out there, and the people who had tried to silence me, who had taken advantage of my vulnerability, were going to answer for what they had done. And for the first time in years, I could breathe freely again, knowing that justice was finally within reach. The tension between Ethan and me had been building for months, each day a step closer to the inevitable. I had played my hand carefully, each move calculated, but now it was time for the final blow. I had gathered all the pieces, and I wasn't about to let him get away with the mess he'd made of my life. The truth was out, and I wasn't hiding from it anymore. It all came to a head during a family meeting, one Ethan had insisted on, convinced he could still manipulate everyone into thinking he was the victim. He had convinced himself that I was just a confused old woman, someone to be pitied. But today, he would see just how wrong he was. Rebecca, my daughter, had been torn for so long. I knew that. I could see the guilt in her eyes, the way she had tried to stay neutral for as long as she could. But the truth had a way of finding its way to the surface, no matter how hard you tried to bury it. And when Rebecca finally saw the evidence, when she saw the extent of Ethan and David's betrayal, her loyalty shifted. She knew, deep down, that I was right all along. "I'm with you, Mom," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion, her eyes filled with regret for not realizing sooner. I should have listened. Her words were like a breath of fresh air. It wasn't just the legal victory I was after. It was the emotional victory. To have my daughter standing by my side again, truly standing by me, was something I hadn't even dared hope for. The day of the meeting, Ethan arrived early, full of his usual arrogance, expecting to once again manipulate the situation in his favor. He sat across from me, his gaze cold, calculating. He was still holding on to the belief that he could control the narrative, that he could make everyone see him as the good son, the one who had been doing all of this for my own good. "Mom, you've got to stop this," Ethan began, trying to put on his most sympathetic tone, his eyes scanning the room for any signs of weakness. "You're making a huge mistake. I've been taking care of you. You've never had to worry about anything. All I've done is for you." I couldn't even look at him without seeing the lies, without seeing the years of manipulation he had put me through. The words he was speaking now were the same ones he had been saying for months, but they were falling flat. I wasn't listening anymore. It was time to end this once and for all. I stood up, calm and steady, the papers I had been carefully organizing placed firmly in my hands. The silence in the room was deafening, and I could feel all eyes on me, waiting. "I know exactly what you've done, Ethan," I said, my voice strong, unwavering. "I know about the fraud, the forged documents, the way you've been manipulating me and the family for months. You've taken advantage of my illness, and you've lied, cheated, and stolen everything you could from me." Ethan's face shifted, the mask slipping, replaced by panic. "What are you talking about? You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying," I replied, stepping forward, letting the weight of the truth sink in. I pulled out the evidence, documents, contracts, letters, all the proof I had gathered. "You've been planning this from the start, you and David Lane. This wasn't about caring for me. This was about taking everything I've worked for. You wanted my house, my business, my money, and you thought I wouldn't remember. that I wouldn't see through your lies. The room was still, and for a moment I thought Ethan might crumble. His arrogance had turned into fear. He looked around, searching for support, but there was none. His eyes flickered to Rebecca, as if pleading with her, but she wasn't looking at him the way she used to. She wasn't the daughter who blindly believed him anymore. She was the woman who had seen the truth, and the truth was that Ethan had betrayed us both. "No," Ethan said, his voice trembling. "No, you don't understand. I was doing what was best for you. All I've done is for you. You're wrong. You're wrong." His voice grew louder, more frantic, but I stood firm. I wasn't backing down. "Stop," I said, cutting him off. "You don't get to lie to me anymore. You don't get to manipulate anyone in this family again. You lost, Ethan. The truth is out." I turned to Rebecca, her face pale with emotion. "You don't have to stand by him anymore," I said softly. "You don't have to feel guilty for not seeing it before. This is his doing, and now it's over." Ethan's frustration boiled over. He stood up, fists clenched, his face red with rage. "You're making a mistake, Mom. You'll regret this." I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I was ready for this. "You don't get to intimidate me anymore," I said, my voice steady, calm. "You don't control me. Not anymore." Ethan stepped forward, but something in my stance, something in my gaze, made him hesitate. The anger was there, but so was the realization that he had lost control of the situation. He could see it now. The tables had turned. The woman he thought was frail, confused, and helpless had become his worst nightmare. I wasn't the mother he could manipulate anymore. The humiliation in his eyes was like a balm to my soul. It wasn't just about the inheritance. It wasn't about money. It was about power. It was about taking back what was mine, what had been stolen from me, and making sure he would never have the authority over my life again. As the meeting ended, Ethan stood there, speechless. He knew he had lost everything. The walls that had once supported Ethan's schemes were beginning to crumble. It was no longer just me standing up against him. With Rebecca by my side, truly by my side for the first time in years, and with Charlie's constant guidance, we began to make our moves. Every action was calculated. Every decision, a step closer to taking back everything he had taken from me. With my fortune and influence, I was able to expose David Lane for the fraud he was. The network of lies he had built over the years, carefully hidden behind his position as a lawyer, was finally brought to light. It didn't take long for the authorities to move, especially after we presented the evidence. His corruption was undeniable, and soon enough, David was expelled from the legal profession. The charges, fraud, corruption, manipulation of assets, were too much for him to overcome. He had spent so long operating under the radar, but now the world saw him for who he truly was. As for Ethan, his fall was just as swift. The moment the truth about his manipulation became clear, he lost all his allies. The family, once afraid of confronting him, now saw him for the selfish, manipulative man he had always been. His support evaporated, and as his disgrace became public, he was expelled from the inheritance. The wealth, the property, everything that had once been in his hands was redistributed. It wasn't for him anymore. It was for the family, for charity, and for those who had been hurt by his greed. I had thought about this moment for so long. I had dreamed about what I would do, what I would say when the time came. But nothing could prepare me for the final confrontation. The last time I saw Ethan, it was in the home that we had once shared, the place he had taken over in his pursuit of everything I had worked for. The place that had once been a sanctuary had become his battleground. And now he was losing. I didn't ask for a meeting. I didn't need to. He came to me, as if he still had some sort of claim on me, as if his words could somehow undo the damage he had done. "I never meant for things to go this far, Mom," he said, his voice wavering. He had lost his usual confidence, now replaced by something much darker, desperation. He was empty. "I was just trying to help you. I thought I was doing what was best." His voice cracked, and for a brief moment I could see the same boy I had raised, the boy I had once loved. But it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. "You were never trying to help me," I said, my voice firm, unwavering. "You were only trying to help yourself. You never cared about me, Ethan. You only cared about what I could give you." He took a step forward, as though hoping my words could be taken back, as though he could turn the clock back to a time when he could manipulate me, when I would have believed his lies. "I'm sorry, okay? I've made mistakes. I'll make it right. Please," he begged, his voice now a whisper. His eyes were wide, desperate. "I can fix this. Just, please, forgive me." It was pathetic. The same man who had used my confusion against me, who had played me for a fool, was now begging for my forgiveness. But I had learned something in this battle for control. I had learned that forgiveness wasn't something he deserved. It wasn't something that could erase what he had done. "You don't deserve my forgiveness," I said, my voice colder than it had ever been. "You don't deserve anything from me. You've taken everything, my trust, my love, my life, and used it for your own gain. You think you can just say sorry and expect it all to be forgotten? You can't. You've crossed a line, Ethan, and you can't come back from it." He staggered back, his face filled with disbelief. "But I wasn't finished. You've lost all of it. The inheritance, the money, the family, everything you thought you had, it's gone. And I'm done. You're done." I felt the weight of the words in my chest, but they felt good. They felt like a finality I had been waiting for. I wasn't just taking back what was mine. I was finally freeing myself from the grip he had held over me for so long. He stood there, frozen, as if hoping that I would say something to take it all back. But I couldn't. I had given him every chance. I had loved him, tried to protect him, tried to believe in him. But he had shown me who he really was, and that man didn't deserve a place in my life. I turned away from him, walking towards the door, and when I looked back one last time, I saw him standing there, defeated. He had lost everything, and I was done. "Goodbye, Ethan," I said, my voice steady. "Don't ever come back." The silence in the room after I left felt deafening, but it wasn't a silence of regret. It was a silence of closure. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. Ethan was no longer a part of my life. The man who had manipulated me, who had tried to control me, was gone, and I was finally taking back what was mine. I was done. The battle was over, and I had won. With Ethan and David's downfall complete, Mabel was finally free to embrace the life she had fought so hard to reclaim. No longer trapped in the shadows of her past, she began to take control in every sense. Her inheritance was hers again, and with that came a new sense of purpose. The once sterile walls of the nursing home were replaced by a home that reflected her true self, warm, inviting, and full of life. The fog of confusion from the Alzheimer's seemed to clear a little more each day, and for the first time in years, Mabel felt in control of her destiny. Charlie remained by her side, a loyal friend who had helped her navigate the darkest of times. Together, they had built a foundation, a cause that would help the elderly who had been neglected and forgotten, just as she once had been. With her restored fortune, Mabel poured her energy into this foundation, offering support to those who had been ignored by their families or cast aside due to age. It wasn't just about money, it was about compassion, empathy, and fighting for those whose voices had been silenced. Mabel also took the time to rebuild her relationship with Rebecca. The rift that had grown between them had finally healed. Rebecca now understood her mother's choices, the strength it took to stand up to Ethan and David. There were no more secrets, no more guilt hanging over them. As mother and daughter, they forged a bond stronger than ever, united not just by blood, but by the shared experience of overcoming betrayal and injustice. Ethan, now a shadow of the man he had once been, no longer had any power over Mabel. The lies he had told, the manipulations he had orchestrated, everything had been exposed. He was left with nothing, stripped of his wealth, his influence, and most of all, his dignity. His attempts to gain sympathy fell on deaf ears, as the family saw him for what he truly was. Mabel, however, stood tall, a woman who had taken back her life and, in doing so, had dismantled the legacy of deceit that Ethan and David had tried to build. As the dust settled, Mabel's life began to take on a new rhythm. She found peace, not in the fortune she had recovered, but in the wisdom she had gained through it all. Her experiences became a source of strength, and she used them to help others. Mabel became a respected figure, not just for her wealth, but for her resilience, her ability to rise above the circumstances that had nearly broken her. She began giving lectures on topics that had once seemed distant to her, on estate fraud, elder abuse, and empowerment for the elderly. She shared her story with anyone who would listen, determined to make sure that what happened to her wouldn't happen to anyone else. She spoke not from a place of bitterness, but from a place of deep understanding, because she had lived through it, and she had come out the other side stronger than ever. The final scene of Mabel's story unfolded at a charity event, a celebration of everything she had built. Standing beside her daughter, Rebecca, and her loyal friend, Charlie, Mabel smiled with pride. Her journey was not just one of survival, but of triumph. She had taken back her life, but more than that, she had built a legacy of giving back, of showing others that no matter the circumstances, you could always rise. In the end, Mabel's greatest victory wasn't the financial restitution or the defeat of Ethan and David. It was the emotional freedom she had gained, the strength she had found in herself, and the way she had transformed her pain into something that would help others. Her story would be remembered not for the injustice she had endured, but for the incredible strength and grace with which she had overcome it. Mabel had become the woman she was always meant to be, a woman who would never be silenced, who would always stand tall, and who would use her story to light the way for others. And in doing so, she had finally found peace. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.